The little crowned one who couldn't stop falling in love again. The first thing everyone noticed about the little crowned one was how small they looked beneath the weight of the crown. The metal circlet was thin and simple, made from human alloy, not gold or jewels. Still, it rested heavy on a young head that had not yet learned how to ignore fear. The crown marked authority, but the eyes beneath it carried something else. They carried care. Humanity had risen fast among the stars, not by conquest, not by fear, but by endurance. Humans repaired what others abandoned. They listened where others commanded. That was how the Stellar Council first noticed them. And that was how the little crowned one was chosen. They were not the strongest leader. They were not the loudest. They were chosen because when disaster reports arrived, they read every name. The crowned one ruled from a moving seat, a long silver ship that drifted between systems. It was called the Wayfarer Throne. From there, the ruler met governors, captains, and survivors. Advisors begged them to remain distant, to rule from numbers and screens. The crowned one refused. On the third cycle of their reign, a signal came from a border colony called Haven Ring. It was a small station near a mining belt. The message was broken. Fires, breaches, unknown attackers. The council suggested delay. Scouts first, military response later. The crowned one stood, crown catching the cold light of the chamber. They listened to the last seconds of the message again. A shaking voice, a child crying in the background. They ordered the Wayfarer Throne to change course. No one argued out loud. Some exchanged worried looks. Everyone knew this pattern. When the crowned one heard fear, they moved toward it. The journey took 2 days at high burn. During the travel, the crowned one walked the ship often. They spoke with crew members by name. They asked where people came from. They remembered. The ship captain, an older human with steady hands, warned gently that this might be a trap. The crowned one nodded. They always nodded when warned. They never ignored danger. They simply waited against people. When the Wayfarer Throne arrived, Haven Ring was broken open like a cracked shell. Parts of the station drifted slowly, still glowing from recent heat. Emergency lights blinked in silence. No enemy ships remained. Shuttles were launched immediately. The crowned one insisted on joining the first rescue team. Advisors protested. Security demanded delay. The crowned one placed a hand on the cold rail and spoke softly. They are waiting. Inside the station, air was thin but breathable. Fires had burned themselves out. Bodies floated where gravity had failed. The crowned one moved slowly, guided by the rescue team. They did not look away. Survivors were found in a sealed storage ring, dozens of them. Hungry, shaking, alive. When the door opened, fear filled the room. Then someone recognized the crown. The crowned one removed the circlet and held it at their side. "I am here," they said. A woman stepped forward. Her face was burned, her arm wrapped in torn cloth. She asked why. "Why did they attack us? We had nothing." The crowned one had no answer that would heal the wound. They said the only true thing: you mattered enough to be noticed. They stayed for hours. They helped carry the injured. They listened to stories that would never reach official reports. A young technician spoke of the attackers. Tall figures, silent weapons, symbols burned into walls. The advisors later identified the markings as belonging to a distant empire known for expansion through pressure rather than open war. They denied involvement immediately. When the Wayfarer throne returned to safe space, the Crowned One ordered aid sent to Haven Ring, ships, supplies, engineers, not loans, gifts. The council reacted with concern. These resources weaken our position, one representative warned. The Crowned One listened. Then they asked how many survivors were alive because of the response. The answer was thousands. The council did not argue further, but something shifted. Across the stars, observers began to study the human ruler. Reports were written, patterns noted. The Crowned One grew attached to places quickly. They visited Haven Ring again a week later. Reconstruction had begun. People smiled when they arrived. A child ran forward and hugged the Crowned One without asking permission. Security froze. The Crowned One laughed softly and returned the embrace. In that moment, distant eyes watched. The rival empire did not see weakness. They saw certainty. If the Crowned One loved easily, then love could be used. Back aboard the Wayfarer throne, the Crowned One stood alone in the observation hall. Stars stretched endlessly ahead. The crown rested on a pedestal behind them. They thought of the burn station, the frightened voices, the child's arms. They knew the truth, even if no one said it. Every time they chose people over power, the galaxy learned something about humans, and not everyone would approve. Far away, a fleet changed direction. The little Crowned One did not know yet, but they had already fallen in love again. This time, with a fragile station that refused to die. And that love had just drawn a shadow closer. The Crowned One did not return to the capital immediately. Instead, they chose the neutral station of Solus Gate as the next stop. It was a hub where humans and other species met to trade, negotiate, and sometimes spy. The Crowned One walked through crowded corridors, noticing the eyes that followed. They smiled softly at those who needed reassurance and nodded to those who needed respect. Advisors stayed close, whispering warnings. A few tried to convince the Crowned One to remain on the ship, to avoid entangling themselves in the station's politics, but the Crowned One shook their head. They believed that presence mattered more than strategy sometimes. If a hand reached out, it should be held. At Solus Gate, 3 people caught their attention immediately. One was a ship captain, older and cautious, who had survived many skirmishes and learned patience. Another was a quiet strategist, whose voice was measured and calm, but whose eyes missed nothing. The third was a refugee leader from a far-off world, small and frail, yet full of courage. Each carried stories that the Crowned One wanted to hear. Negotiations began. Trade agreements, security pacts. Questions about human expansion. The Crowned One listened more than they spoke, but every so often they would step forward and ask about lives instead of numbers. How many had been saved? How many were still hungry? How did people feel after the last attacks? The neutral representatives exchanged glances. They were not used to leaders asking about emotion. Some laughed silently. Some frowned. Then came a warning from the strategist. Signals suggested that someone had observed the Crowned One's pattern. The way they cared first, acted second. The rival empire across the border could manipulate crises, knowing exactly how the Crowned One would respond. The Crowned One looked at the strategist and said, "Then we must act with love, not fear." A signal from a small mining world arrived. The message was desperate. The inhabitants claimed genocide. Advisors urged caution. The strategist suggested sending scouts. The Crowned One did neither. They ordered the Wayfarer throne to set course immediately. When the ship arrived, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. The world's communication arrays were down. The lights dimmed. Nothing moved. The Crowned One sent a landing team. They went down with minimal guards, insisting on meeting the people themselves. The scene was eerie. Buildings were empty, fields untouched. Silence stretched across valleys. Then an ambush struck. Machines the Crowned One had never seen attacked without warning. The landing team fought back. Explosions shook the ground. Humans and others struggled together. The Crowned One did not hide. They coordinated rescue efforts, guided people to safe zones, and held the hands of those terrified. A figure from the refugee world betrayed the team, leading some into danger. The Crowned One faced them without anger, only disappointment. The traitor fled. In the aftermath, many were lost. Ships destroyed, supplies gone, and yet some survived. The Crowned One counted the lives saved and knew that, even if the decision had been flawed, it had saved more than it had destroyed. The lesson was heavy. Back on the Wayfarer throne, the Crowned One stood in the observation hall, silent. Advisors spoke of errors, of vulnerability, of danger. The Crowned One listened. Then they walked among the crew, thanking each by name, listening to their stories. They fell in love again, not with people in a shallow way, but with their courage, their strength, and their persistence. The galaxy was starting to notice patterns in human decisions. The Crowned One's choices and the loyalty inspired began to spread like quiet fire. Somewhere in the rival empire, analysts frowned. If humans acted predictably because of care, then that care could be studied, exploited, or destroyed. But the Crowned One did not fear that yet. Their heart was still open. They believed that love, even when used against them, was worth everything. Far away, a fleet altered its course. They were watching, waiting. The little Crowned One had unknowingly drawn attention from eyes that did not share humanity's values, yet the Crowned One did not notice. They were too busy holding on to hope and protecting those who could not protect themselves. They could not stop falling in love again, even when danger lurked. The Crowned One could not rest. News came that another world had sent urgent requests. The messages were fragmentary, incomplete, and possibly false. Advisors begged them to wait for confirmation. They said to send scouts first, to verify. The Crowned One shook their head. They had learned from past mistakes, but they still believed that the presence of care could make a difference. The Wayfarer throne moved through the void again. Alongside it traveled a small fleet of support vessels, all following the Crowned One's careful orders. They did not rush recklessly. They did not avoid danger. They traveled with a human balance of caution and care. Upon arrival, the world appeared calm. Fields swayed under gentle breezes.
Cities stood quiet, yet the atmosphere carried unease.
As the Crowned One disembarked with a small team, hidden attackers struck. It was a trap. Explosions rocked the city. Civilians screamed. Humans and allies scrambled to defend themselves. The Crowned One moved among them, guiding, protecting, inspiring. They did not hesitate. Even as shrapnel flew and fires spread, they held on to the belief that lives could be saved. Someone close betrayed them. A translator who had gained their trust led a group into danger, revealing hidden positions of the ambushers. The Crowned One confronted the traitor, eyes steady and voice quiet. They did not raise anger. They only asked, why? The reply was lost in the chaos, and the traitor fled into the night. By the time the battle ended, much had been lost. Ships were destroyed. Supplies were gone. Some lives were lost, yet others survived. The crowned one counted them, sorrowful but relieved. The loss weighed heavily. It was a bitter reminder that even love could not prevent all harm. Back on the Wayfarer throne, the crowned one walked through the corridors silently. Advisors whispered of mistakes and weaknesses. They said the crown was too soft, too human. The crowned one listened, but they did not change. Instead, they walked among the crew, offering encouragement and care. They remembered names, faces, voices, and promises. They fell in love again, not with romance, but with the courage of the people they led, the resilience of those who survived, and the hope that still burned in quiet hearts. Meanwhile, distant observers took careful note. They studied the crowned one's decisions, their patterns of attachment, and their willingness to risk everything for others. The rival empire saw an opportunity. A leader who acted predictably because of their care could be manipulated. The crowned one did not see the full danger yet. They only saw people who needed help, and they could not stop falling in love again. That love, so simple and human, had become a beacon across the stars. It inspired loyalty, courage, and hope. Somewhere in the shadows, the rival empire began planning. They would test the crowned one. They would push against the human way. And they would discover that love could be both a weakness and a weapon. But for the crowned one, there was only one truth. Each life mattered, and they would always go where care was needed, no matter the cost. The crowned one had changed, though not in ways that anyone outside their ship could fully understand. They still fell in love easily, but they fell with purpose. Every bond, every connection, every trust given was measured and remembered. They had learned to channel emotion into strategy without losing heart. They had learned that love, if used wisely, could become a strength, not a weakness. The Wayfarer throne moved quietly through the uncharted corridors of space. Small fleets, loyal crews, and quiet allies followed at a distance, all touched by the crowned one's attention and care. Humans were appearing in unexpected places, helping repair colonies, mediating disputes, and offering protection. No one noticed at first, but soon the influence spread like a gentle tide across the stars. The crowned one visited a small trading post on the edge of the system. Merchants greeted them, not out of fear or obligation, but because of trust. A small child ran forward and held the crowned one's hand, guiding them through a maze of makeshift buildings. The crowned one laughed softly, kneeling to match the child's eyes. In that simple moment, loyalty was born. Those merchants would defend the humans without question, because they were seen. At another station, they found engineers struggling to restore a damaged reactor. The crowned one joined them, not commanding, not dictating, but lifting panels, tightening bolts, and asking questions. The engineers shared not only knowledge, but hopes and dreams. The crowned one remembered them all, storing names and faces as if cataloging stars. Everywhere the crowned one went, whispers began. Other species observed humans acting in unexpected ways. They did not conquer. They did not demand. They helped, they listened, and they stayed when most would leave. The crowned one's pattern was clear. Presence mattered more than power. Empathy mattered more than fear. The rival empire noticed. Analysts studied reports and found the predictable pattern. The crowned one acted based on care, forming attachments quickly and deeply. If manipulated correctly, they believed, humans could be drawn into traps, conflicts, and mistakes. It seemed too easy. But they underestimated change. The Crowned One had learned from betrayal and missteps. They fell in love deliberately, but not blindly. Each attachment became a node in a growing network of human influence. Whew. The people they helped became allies. The cities they saved became fortresses, and the networks they nurtured became fleets of quiet resistance. A distant world under threat sent a plea for aid. This time, the Crown One did not rush recklessly. They analyzed the message, cross-referenced it with the reports of scouts, and traveled with a prepared team. Every step was calculated, every bond strengthened. When they arrived, they found that the threat was real, but smaller than feared. They contained it quickly, showing strength not by violence alone, but by presence, care, and leadership. Humans across the systems began to notice subtle changes in the Crowned One. They were still tender-hearted, but they were smarter in how they deployed that heart. Every act of love became a tool of influence, every decision a blend of care and foresight. Those who watched closely realized that humanity had grown invisible power without needing armies or weapons. The Crowned One's ability to fall in love again had created a web that no rival empire could easily break. Far away, fleets that once sought to exploit the Crowned One's predictable care found themselves entangled in unexpected resistance. Colonies that had been abandoned rebuilt and defended themselves, inspired by the memory of the Crowned One's presence. Small groups of humans and allies operated independently, guided by the lessons learned from the Crowned One, carrying hope like a flag into unknown space. Yet even as victories multiplied, shadows lingered. Rivals were plotting, spies moved quietly, and threats appeared in unexpected corners. The Crowned One knew that every act of care might draw danger, but they could not stop. They could not abandon the people who depended on them. They could not stop falling in love again. Back aboard the Wayfarer throne, the Crowned One stood in the observation hall, staring at the stars that stretched endlessly. Each star was a possibility, each world a story, each life a connection. They knew the galaxy was changing, quietly but irrevocably. Humans were no longer small or weak. They were present, alive in ways that could not be counted by fleets or weapons alone. The Crowned One's heart had become the measure of human power. A message arrived from a neighboring system. It was a warning. Rivals were preparing something large, something calculated. Analysts predicted that the Crowned One would respond with care, and that response could be used against humanity. The Crowned One read it and smiled faintly. They had learned to fall, yes, but now they fell smarter. They would act, but not blindly. They would protect, but not recklessly. And they would continue to fall in love, again and again, with people, worlds, and possibilities, knowing that that love was now their greatest power and their greatest shield. War had reached the core systems of human influence. The rival empire moved with precision, expecting humans to falter under pressure. They assumed that care made humans weak. The Crowned One knew differently. They had seen fear, betrayal, and death, but they had also seen courage, loyalty, and hope. They understood that love, when chosen carefully, was a force that could unite more than fear ever could. The Crowned One stood on the bridge of the Wayfarer throne, looking at the stars and the fleets that stretched before them. The rival empire demanded surrender, claiming that humans were too soft to survive. Advisors pleaded for caution. They presented maps, strategies, and warnings. The Crowned One listened, but they did not fear. Instead, they prepared to speak to the galaxy. A transmission was sent from the bridge, not to fleets or generals, but directly to the people of the systems under threat. The Crowned One spoke quietly but firmly. They spoke of every life saved, every bond made, every child who had been held, and every voice that had been heard. They reminded everyone that human care was not weakness, but the source of resilience. Across the systems, humans, allies, and even neutral species listened. The words carried hope, loyalty, and inspiration. Ships that had been abandoned, colonies that had been left to fend for themselves, and isolated crews began moving, not because of orders, not because of treaties, but because of recognition. The Crowned One had touched their hearts. The rival empire reacted. They unleashed fleets in waves, expecting panic and chaos, yet humans and allies moved with surprising coordination. Small forces became effective fleets. Quiet colonies became fortresses. The people who had been seen, protected, and cared for by the Crowned One were now acting independently, empowered by love and memory. In the midst of battle, the Crowned One moved among the leaders and crews. They spoke words of encouragement, recognized effort, and reminded individuals of the lives they had saved. Every word, every gesture strengthened the network of loyalty that had grown across the stars. People fought harder, defended better, and risked themselves bravely because they'd been seen and loved. The rival empire watched in disbelief. Their calculations had been precise, their traps carefully laid. But humans and their allies did not follow predictions. They acted with purpose inspired by care, not fear. The empire began to lose control over their own forces. Defections, confusion, and hesitation spread across their fleets. In the center of the chaos, the Crowned One took the Wayfarer throne to a strategic location, coordinating rescue and reinforcement efforts. They did not fight personally, but their presence was felt everywhere. Fleets moved faster, colonies fortified, and wounded crews were saved in ways the rival empire had not predicted. Each action strengthened the humans' position while diminishing the enemy's. Despite the danger, the Crowned One fell in love again. They fell in love with the courage of the ordinary people who now made decisions, fought battles, and saved lives without direct command. They fell in love with small colonies that refused to surrender, and with allies who had joined humanity because they were recognized and valued. Each act of care had multiplied into a network that the empire could not crush. Days turned into cycles, battles erupted, quiet victories were celebrated, and losses were mourned. The Crowned One stood on the bridge at night, watching the lights of ships and stations flicker across space. They felt the weight of responsibility, but also the strength of connections they had nurtured. As the conflict reached its peak, the rival empire's central command was forced to withdraw. Internal rebellions, loss of trust, and the unpredicted loyalty of humans and allies made continued aggression impossible. The Crowned One's strategy of deliberate care had created an invisible army, not of weapons, but of loyalty, courage, and hope. The Crowned One addressed the galaxy once more. They did not speak of victory, but of the choices that had led to it. They reminded humans and allies that care, empathy, and presence had become the foundation of survival and power. The message was clear. Strength is measured not only in fleets and weapons, but in the hearts of those who live and act together. The Wayfarer throne left the central system, carrying the Crowned One across the stars. Everywhere they went, messages of hope, loyalty, and recognition followed. Systems that had been isolated now coordinated in new ways. Humans had grown not by force, but by care, by falling in love repeatedly with the lives and potential of others. Even as the rival empire regrouped, it was clear that humans were no longer weak. They were a network of courage, empathy, and unbroken loyalty. The Crowned One had proven that falling in love again was not foolishness, but a calculated strength that shaped the galaxy. The Crowned One looked out at the endless stars, knowing that the battles had ended not in destruction alone, but in the birth of a new era, an era defined by human connection, care, and the unending willingness to fall in love again, no matter the cost. The Crowned One had survived what many called impossible. The rival empire had been pushed back, systems that had been on the edge of destruction had been saved, and humans had risen across the galaxy not by force, but by presence and care. The Crowned One had fallen in love repeatedly, with people, places, and possibilities, and it had shaped the course of history. They moved quietly through the Wayfarer throne, observing the stars that stretched endlessly beyond the observation windows. The galaxy looked calm now, but the Crowned One knew that calm could not last forever. Shadows lingered, and distant eyes still watched, but for the first time they felt a sense of peace. The network of human influence was strong, resilient, and connected. Humanity was no longer small. Colonies rebuilt, trade routes stabilized, and fleets that had been scattered were united. Humans had created power without armies, had protected without domination, and had inspired loyalty without fear. All of it stemmed from the Crowned One's heart, which refused to harden, which refused to stop falling in love. The Crowned One thought of the child at Haven Ring, the engineers at distant stations, the refugees who had found safety, and the quiet leaders who had trusted them. Each had been touched by care, and each now acted with courage, independence, and loyalty. That was the real victory. Lives had changed, and in doing so, the galaxy itself had shifted. The Crowned One walked among their crew, offering soft words and gentle guidance. They listened to stories of bravery, of ordinary humans doing extraordinary things. They smiled at each account, recognizing faces and names, remembering promises and moments. Each bond was a thread in the web that had saved the species. Across the stars, the rival empire attempted to recover, but their calculations failed. They could not predict humans, because humans did not act from fear or strategy alone. They acted from care. The Crowned One had turned what others saw as weakness into an unbreakable strength. Messages arrived from systems that had been quiet for cycles. They spoke of new leaders rising, inspired by the Crowned One's actions. The message was simple. Humans would continue to care, to help, and to act together. They would continue to fall in love with people and possibilities, and that love would shape decisions, defenses, and growth. The Crowned One reflected on the journey. Each fall of the heart had been met with danger, loss, or betrayal. Each time they had chosen. Again, choosing care over caution, connection over isolation. Each choice had mattered. Each choice had inspired others. They remembered the faces of those lost, the tears of those saved, and the quiet courage that had appeared in unexpected moments. They understood that love was not merely an emotion, but a force that could heal, unite, and empower. And now the Crowned One considered the future. They would not remain in absolute command forever. They would step back eventually, allowing the seeds of loyalty and courage to grow in others. Humanity would continue to rise because of what they had learned. That care, presence, and repeated love created strength beyond weapons or fleets. Before leaving the central command chamber, the Crowned One paused. They looked at the stars, bright with possibilities, and smiled. They had fallen in love again, with a galaxy that was both fragile and strong. They had fallen in love with humanity's potential and with the choices that people made when they felt seen, valued, and safe. The Wayfarer throne prepared to move again, carrying the crowned one toward new systems, new people, and new challenges. They did not know what the future held, but they knew this: they would continue to fall in love, to care, and to act. That was the heart of humanity, the source of power, and the legacy they would leave. And as the stars stretched endlessly ahead, the crowned one took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to meet whatever came next. The galaxy had learned that falling in love was not a weakness. It was the very reason humans could rise, endure, and thrive. The crowned one smiled, knowing that they could never stop, and the universe would never forget.